Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. I'm your host, Andrew Langer. Joining us today, unfortunately, because of technical issues, we don't have a camera for him, but his name is Mike Prado. He is the Deputy Assistant Director of the Homeland Security Investigations Cybercrime Center at the Department of Homeland Security. With over 2 decades of experience in various roles within DHS, Prado has established himself as a key figure in combating cybercrimes and transnational criminal activities. And Mike, let's just start here. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in this, when you joined DHS, sort of a little bit of background there.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you and your audience. I've been in federal law enforcement, as you mentioned, for well over 2 decades. Got into it back when, before there was a DHS, when it was the U.S. Customs Service Office of Investigations, and transitioned to the Department of Homeland Security upon its creation in 2003. Been working cybercrime related investigations since I joined the federal government. And much like the mission of HSI, my career somewhat has evolved to address the continued evolution of cybercrime as a whole. Here at the DHS Cybercrime Center, we've recently expanded to encompass more than just HSI. It is an HSI-led center, but we are involved with the entirety of the department and its broad mission to safeguard public safety and national security through prevention and investigation of cybercrime.
Yeah, see, I don't even think I realized that DHS was doing cyber crimes. I don't, for whatever reason, I just thought this was more of an FBI and a DOJ thing, Department of Justice thing. But has DHS always sort of had this within their orbit?
It really has. Certainly HSI has been, I would say, the law enforcement leader in the federal government when it comes to online child sexual exploitation and abuse. That has since evolved into an increased mission to investigate and prevent cybercrime, cyber-enabled, cyber-facilitated crime in the form of business email compromise, ransomware, network intrusion, things of that nature. Anything with a transnational nexus, HSI is the investigative arm of DHS and therefore would have investigative jurisdiction, and that includes cybercrime.
God, that makes, so now I'm understanding. So if it were just interstate, if it were just within the United States, that might not be within you guys, or do you guys also do stuff here, or does your orbit begin, when it happens between the borders?
Our primary focus is transnational. So yes, between borders and to include the cyber border. We do work domestic investigations, but generally it traces back to a transnational nexus, and we work very closely with our partners at the Department of Justice as well.
That makes sense. I mean, and as you said, it's the orbit has grown, outside of the child exploitation and sextortion. Let's start with that, though, and then we'll sort of move into things like ransomware and those kinds of attacks. But let's start with, talk about the various forms and talk about where, if the problem is growing, is it things getting better or things getting worse? What's going on there?
Yeah, great question. The fact of the matter is that online child sexual exploitation and abuse has been around since the inception of the internet, quite frankly. And that's where we HSI, originally got our foot in the door, as I mentioned, in the investigation of cybercrime. However, since the inception of the internet and the exponential growth of online platforms, child exploitation has grown commensurate with that accessibility online. The sad fact is that this is a crime that is a top priority of HSI. It's their second largest investigative discipline. We expend more than 1.2 million agent hours per year investigating this crime. And sadly, the crime continues to grow. It's to give you some context, we work very closely with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. We have agents and analysts embedded with those good folks over there. They receive the lion's share of cyber tip reports from private industry, social media platforms, internet service providers. When I started in this business, almost, like I said, two decades ago, about 12 million tips were coming into the cyber tip line annually. That has now grown to 36 million
Wow.
cyber tips just this past year. There are not enough law enforcement agents or detectives or police officers in the United States or the world to address that type of exponential growth.
But is it growing because the problem's getting worse, or is it that these platforms are getting better at spotting it, using various pieces of software to be able to identify these things? There's obviously a huge discussion of AI, and we're going to get into the issue of deepfakes in a second. But as the use of AI grows in terms of dealing with cybersecurity issues, so is it before that the problem was just underrepresented, underreported because of the man hours it would take to find it, or is it growing because it's growing?
That's a great question. Bottom line, the problem is growing.
Yeah,
the problem is growing because as more people get online, it's more accessible. We have seen a shift from what we would term the open web to much more activity within the dark web, involving child sexual exploitation and abuse. We've seen a lot now because of social media, because of the increase in smart mobile devices, the self-production of child sexual exploitation and abuse. We've seen a recent increase in the commercial sale of child sexual abuse material using cryptocurrency to purchase and obtain child exploitation material. And as you mentioned, generative AI is the next big wave that law enforcement is presently, to include HSI, we're right in the middle of experiencing a major growth in the use of generative AI tools to create or alter previously existing child sexual abuse material.
Let's talk about that. This issue of deepfakes and AI and just what the law says. I mean, obviously, we're talking about this within the context of things like, the political sphere and what happens there. And obviously, I'm not asking you to comment on that. But obviously, as software progresses, it becomes easier, faster, much more sophisticated. So talk about this and then the issue of the legality.
Sure. I'll actually start with the legality.
Yeah.
There's a misconception out there that AI generated images of child exploitation are somehow, in a gray area or even legal, and that cannot be further from the truth. We work very closely with the Department of Justice, Child Exploitation and Obscenity Section here in Washington, D.C. There's been numerous case law established all the way up to the Supreme Court determining that AI-generated images of child exploitation are in fact illegal. They're charged under 18 U.S.C. 1466, which is an obscenity section on the books in the United States Code. We've worked very closely with every U.S. Attorney's Office across the United States to help educate federal prosecutors on how to charge those cases, on how to prosecute those to the fullest extent of the law. And ultimately, what we find, Andrew, is when our agents go in and seize material, let's say from a suspect on their devices, not only do we find generative AI material, but we ultimately find well-known child exploitation material as well.
Sure.
So individuals are charged in both instances for obscenity and for child exploitation offenses. It's a serious crime, and it's a growing crime.
Well, yeah, but so let's talk about it, because sort of getting into sort of how this term gets defined, so folks really understand what we're talking about here.
Yeah, so what we're talking about is individuals who are using open source software, a lot of which is publicly known, but AI software that can be used to create from text to picture, for example.
Sure.
And an individual can conjure up, depending on the type of software being used, images of child exploitation. And we're working with industry here at the Cybercrime Center, including some of the best known tech companies in the world, to try to come up with technical solutions on how to mitigate this problem. The sad fact is, though, that once the genie is out of the bottle, this is open source information.
Right.
That it becomes very difficult if someone is committed and interested in producing that type of illegal material. Sad fact is they are going to probably do so, but we will investigate them vigorously and as aggressively as we're able to.
But let me ask you this. I mean, is it only sort of the deep fake issue? Does it have to look like it's a real person? Illustrations, things like that. I mean, how does that? Because then it's if someone is drawing something like with a pad and paper, and I'm just sort of trying to wrap my head around sort of the universe here.
Yeah, sure. And look, that obscenity section 1466, not to turn this into a legal seminar.
No, please get down into the weeds here. I mean, we're a policy podcast, so talking about the substance of the law is very important.
Yeah. And I think that's great for your audience to hear this, is that it runs the spectrum. Now, obviously, the majority of what we're focused on here in 2024 is AI generated. But I can tell you, going back to my days as a young agent, investigating drawings. You mentioned drawings. An individual who, let's say, is, and this actually happened in California when I was an agent, and I was a case agent on an individual was awaiting trial for child sexual offenses and was caught drawing images of children engaged in sexual activity. Now, these are very vivid depictions that, and that technically meets the statutory definition. But the reality is that our primary focus is not on drawings. Our primary focus is not even on cartoons, things like that. It is on what generative AI software has enabled individuals with a proclivity for a sexual interest in children to create images that you cannot differentiate between real and what's been created. Sure. They are that accurate. They are that realistic in their depictions and in their depravity. Again, we're talking about images of children that are, infants, toddlers, prepubescent children being sexually abused by adults and being sexually abused by animals, being sexually abused or exposed to sadomasochistic behavior. Just absolutely horrific type of material that our agents routinely find on a daily basis when we're executing search warrants across the country.
Mike, I'm going to ask this, and I, if you don't want to answer, I totally understand. But just hearing about this, it's very hard to hear without having an effect on somebody. How do your agents? How do you stay mentally healthy? And I mean, it's got to be so depressing and so hard to deal with. I mean, there's trauma, right? Witnessing trauma has its own trauma. So how do you guys deal with that?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. What we do is, as a senior executive now within HSI, officer wellness and safety is the top priority for our workforce. And having been an agent that worked these cases almost exclusively for 8 years at the beginning of my career, you're absolutely correct. Viewing trauma can inflict trauma. So having a robust peer support program, having a robust program that what we call the ARMOR program, that we require our agents who are involved in these investigations to talk to professionals about what they're experiencing, to ensure, and we're monitoring our workforce to ensure that they remain healthy, providing healthy outlets, ensuring that agents don't work this for too long. Nobody is forced to work these type of investigations. It's solely voluntary. But I can tell you, Andrew, that there is no shortage of volunteers to work this, because while it's absolutely heart-wrenching to investigate, there is nothing more, powerful to work. There's no higher calling, in my opinion, than what the men and women of HSI and law enforcement in general are doing when it comes to protecting children. So the kind of the renewed focus that you get when you save a child from and pull a child from a home where that child is too young to speak or is mentally disabled, for example, as an example of the case I worked many years ago, and agents are working every day. That quite frankly makes the trauma worth it, the worth it. And it's a tough business to be in, but it's a highly rewarding one that again, I'm in awe every day of the people I get to work with, shoulder to shoulder here at the Cybercrime Center, and our agents in the field, the detectives in the field that we work alongside and on state and local task forces. Again, it really, to me, and to many of my colleagues, is the most important work that we at HSI can do, and we in law enforcement as a whole can perform.
Well, I'm glad you guys are taking care of your own. Let's turn our attention to that work itself, because as you've said, every time there's a technological advance, things change, the landscape changes. Folks are obviously making it hard to be caught. What are you guys doing to find these folks out there?
Yeah, it's a continuous challenge, because the technology in this field of investigation changes rapidly, not only year to year, but really almost week to week.
Sure.
It seems. Staying on top of that, and again, from a leadership perspective, ensuring that the finite amount of resources that we have within the federal government are applied to the right areas strategically to ensure that we're getting the greatest return on investment. So it's not just the purchase of certain hardware systems, but it's the licenses that we acquire from the private sector, and the licenses not licenses, but the tools that we develop in-house as well. So we talk about the issue of generative AI from an adversarial standpoint, but we're working very closely within DHS and within the president's executive order for AI, responsible use of AI, on how to develop systems that can very quickly, as an example, go through the sometimes terabytes of data that we seize from a suspect. How do we quickly go through that? And to go full circle to your original question about trauma inflicted on our workforce, trying to reduce the amount of hours, the amount of time that an agent or an examiner has to actually look at material, right, while coming up with automated tools that can do that for the agent. And that's a real game changer for us, because it enables us to very quickly turn around a forensic report for prosecution, and it minimizes the amount of time that one of our personnel has to actually view this material. Now, there's always going to have to and should always be a human element to this, from an investigative standpoint, from an analytical standpoint, but we are trying to apply certain tools to speed up the investigative process and quite frankly keep up with the criminal adversaries that are using this technology.
That makes sense. Now, as you go down this road, obviously we've talked about the home situations where these kids are getting abused and exploited, but all too frequently we're dealing with, strangers online. Kids are getting sextorted by these strangers online. What can parents be doing, right? There's a lot of discussion in Washington right now about various legislative fixes. And I had a conversation yesterday with somebody who were talking about the role of parents in all of this. Talk about the issue of parents in all of this.
Absolutely. Parents and other trusted adults are absolutely key to this. Children are at a younger and younger age online more and more. That's just the reality of the time that we live in now. Social media platforms, while making certain incremental changes, they still present a tremendous danger to children when it comes to a variety of topics, but specifically including child exploitation and the ability of sexual predators to make contact, whether it's a social media platform or it's a gaming platform for that matter. Where anytime you're essentially opening your home to a stranger, which is the reality of what happens when your child is online. Fortifying that from a parenting perspective or trusted adult perspective is absolutely key. Having those conversations with your child about the threats that exist and the threats that he or she may encounter online is absolutely critical. And keeping those lines of communication with your child so that your child, if approached or if made to feel uncomfortable by somebody online, they can come to a parent or trusted adult to report it, and then in turn report it to law enforcement is absolutely key. And to that point, what we've done to address the exponential growth in this type of activity is come up with the very first of its kind government-led public awareness campaign known as Know to Protect. And if your listeners were to go to knowtoprotect.gov, that's no KNOW, the number 2, protect.gov. As a parent, trusted adult, educator, or anyone who knows a child as an uncle or aunt or cousin. There are safety tips on there on how to put devices on settings that minimize the opportunity for an individual to make contact with a child. How to put certain settings on certain social media platforms or on the devices themselves, and tips on what to do and how to address if a child is solicited online.
Sure. And then you've got a commensurate program to that, which is the HERO program. Tell us about that.
So our HERO program, we're tremendously proud of. That's been in existence now it's in its 11th year. We just graduated 28 heroes this past few weeks, just 3 weeks ago, as a matter of fact, at a ceremony that I had the good fortune of speaking at. We train the heroes at the Cybercrime Center here outside of Washington, D.C. What that cadre is composed of are disabled veterans who have just recently exited out of DOD. And what we do is, through a highly selective process, bring them in, provide them the full training and equipping that a full-time HSI computer forensic examiner would receive. At the end of their training, they become certified computer forensic examiners, primarily dedicated to investigating child exploitation. And what I mean by investigating, taking cases that our agents have investigated and taking the devices under the guidance of a senior forensic examiner and applying those tools, those techniques, and those processes to the devices to extract evidence for these cases. After a year, those heroes become full-time HSI employees as computer forensic examiners. It's a tremendous program. It goes up to the GS-14 level as far as career path. And there's no shortage of volunteers and applicants for that program. It's something that is an absolute force multiplier for what I think is probably the biggest single choke point in these investigations is the extraction and analysis of the data once our agents go into a home or into a business and seize devices that have potential evidentiary value.
So let me ask you, outside of the Know to Protect initiative, which you touched on a moment ago with this HERO program, the average everyday person, they come across something, they are a trusted provider, trusted adult, parent. What do they do if they, and again, this is understanding that normally what we're talking about is something that's across borders. How do they go and report these crimes to whomever?
Yeah, there's multiple ways for that to happen. Certainly, if it's a emergency situation, we want them to report it to their local law enforcement. That's the first and foremost way to go. They can also, as it relates to child exploitation, online child exploitation, go to knowtoprotect.gov, and there's a link there to provide a tip. And HSI itself has a tip line that is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and listeners can report a crime like online child exploitation directly to HSI at 1-877-4-HSI-TIP. Again, that's 1-877-4-HSI-TIP.
Before I let you go, listen, this is a serious topic, and I don't want to make light of it. Normally on these shows, I ask folks who are involved in public policy to talk about their outside interests. And again, you may not want to, but how do you, when you're not doing this work, what is it that you're doing to sort of reaffirm your soul? What are you sort of engaged in that regard?
Oh, that's a good question. No, look, striking a healthy work-life balance is not always easy, and I know your listeners probably experience that in whatever form of government position they may hold. That's always been a challenge, quite frankly, for me, and more so as you rise in the ranks and become an SES. The hours don't shorten by any means, but having that good work-life balance, look, I live in the Washington, D.C. area, so I'm very fortunate to have, great place to go, get exercise, right? Hiking,
sure.
Going to the gym, places like that. I certainly read a lot. Love reading about history. I was a history major in college, so that's my original passion there. And traveling whenever I'm able to get away from the office. And this is quite frankly, one of the jobs that does allow for some pretty great travel, and always trying to find some time to, see things of historic significance when I'm traveling. I just got back from, for instance, Manila, Philippines for official travel. But while there, was able to, take in some of the, historic World War II sites and the Manila American Cemetery Memorial. Yeah. Amazing. So always just trying to strike that proper work-life balance, and that's something I'm adamant that the workforce here at the Cybercrime Center partake in. Absolutely.
Well, his name is Mike Prado. He is the Deputy Assistant Director of Homeland Security Investigations, their Cyber Crimes Center. Know to Protect, KNOW number 2, Protect is how you go out. If you want to learn more about this, if you want to offer up a tip, please contact them, but also contact local law enforcement as well. This has been yet another episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can take the Lunch Hour wherever you go by finding us on one of the many podcast platforms that are out there. Likewise, if you're listening to us on one of those podcast platforms, go and check us out on our YouTube channel. I'm your host, Andrew Langer. Enjoy the rest of your lunch.
This has been the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast, hosted by Andrew Langer. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream.